Rowan? Are you there?
It was Sergeant Blaketon, and I was retrieving a heap of files from the floor of my office. I'd lifted the telephone to answer and dislodged a heap of paperwork with the cable. "Sorry, Sergeant," I responded. "Yes, I'm here." "Get yourself out to Ellersfield. Go and see a Miss Catherine Hardwicke of Oak Crag Cottage. She's got a complaint to make." "What sort of complaint, Sergeant?" "Mischief makers. She's been plagued by somebody from the village. One of the lads, by the sound of it." "Kids," I snorted. "What's he doing to her?" "Daft things, really. Knocking on her door when she's in bed and running away before she opens it. Tapping on the window when she's sitting alone. Pinching tomatoes from her greenhouse and cutting the tops off all her cabbages. That sort of thing. Nuisances, Rowan. Nothing but bloody nuisances." "Is she a regular complainer?" I asked him. "No, she's not. She's a decent, hard-working woman who lives alone, and she earns her keep by growing flowers and vegetables, or doing odd jobs for the folk of the area." "I'm on my way," I said. "Good. It'll keep you quiet for the rest of the morning." Ellersfield lay snug in a deep valley, a cluster of stone-built thatched houses nestling at the head of the dale. Oak Crag Cottage stood at the far end. It was a neatly kept house. The thatch was carefully maintained, and an evergreen hedge acted as a boundary between the cottage and the track by which it stood. The wooden gate was painted a fresh green and bore the name of the house in white letters. I knocked on the door and waited. There was no reply. I moved away from the front door and walked along the sandstone flags to the rear. At the back was a long, flat garden with sheds and poultry runs, and I saw a woman repairing a wire netting fence at the far end. "Hello!" I shouted. She stood and smiled a welcome. "Oh, hello. Is it the police?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I'm PC Rowan from Aidensfield." She came towards me looking pleased as she removed some rubber gloves. She wore a headscarf which almost concealed her face, and I wondered if she was pretty. "Catherine Hardwicke," she introduced herself. "Miss, I'm sorry to trouble you, but I thought I'd better put an official stop to my unwelcome visitor." "You did exactly the right thing. You know who it is?" She nodded her head and said, "Come inside. I'll make a coffee." She led me through a rear door into the cottage. It was very dark inside, and I noticed the rear windows were very small, so typical of these moorland houses. She led me through and into her lounge. As the kettle boiled, she settled on a Windsor chair and smiled pleasantly, removing the headscarf as she talked. She had a long overcoat, which was all tattered and greasy, corduroy trousers and Wellington boots, but as the headscarf came away, I saw that her face was beautifully smooth and pink. Her eyes were bright and alert, her teeth excellent, and her hair as black as night. I estimated her age to be 35. She was very attractive in a rural way. The kettle began to whistle, and she took off her old coat to reveal a well-proportioned figure, clad in a rose-coloured sweater. She vanished into her kitchen and returned with 2 cups of steaming coffee and some homemade fruit cake and ginger biscuits. "Oh, this is lovely," I congratulated her. "You shouldn't have bothered." "Oh, it's nice to get visitors. Now, Mr. Rowan, did your sergeant tell you what all this is about?" "Somebody's playing pranks, being a nuisance, frightening you." "That's about it, Mr. Rowan. I'm not one for calling the police. I usually sort out my own troubles. But I felt this one ought to receive the weight of the law. There's other folks who live alone up here, you see, and some are elderly. I don't want them terrified." "You have an idea who's doing these stupid things?" "I have," she said. "And I've warned him off. He says it's not him, but things keep happening." "Such as?" "It's nothing serious. Last back end, for example. He opened my greenhouse door after I closed it for the night, and the cold air ruined some young plants and flowers. He's let the hens out of their run, and they ruined my garden when I was in Middlesbrough for the day. He knocks on windows and runs off when I'm alone in the house. One day he cut all the heads of my cabbages and ruined them, and another time took the seat off my bike and threw it into a field." Are you frightened? No, she said. No, I'm not frightened. It's just a bloody nuisance, Mr. Rowan, and I wonder if he's doing it to others in Ellersfield, others who are too shy or old to report it. People are shy out here, you know. They don't like making a fuss. I know. I knew enough about the stolid Yorkshire character to fully understand her remarks. Right. Who is it? It's a youth called Ted Ager, she said. You've seen him doing these things? No, but it's him. How can you be so sure? I had to ask. She hesitated, and I wondered if I'd touched a sensitive area. I allowed her to take her time before replying. Mr. Rowan, I'm a woman and I live alone. I'm 36, and I'm not bad-looking. Ted's been pestering me to go out with him, to the pictures, for walks, over to Scarborough for a Sunday trip, that sort of thing. He's only a child, Mr. Rowan, a lad in his early 20s, I'd say. I've turned him down every time, and these things started to go on. Over what period? Maybe a year, no longer. Is he a local lad? Not really. He came from Eltering looking for farm work, and Atkinsons took him on. Atkinsons? Dow Farm, at the bottom of the hill on your way in. I know it, I smiled. OK. Well, Miss Hardwicke, I can have words with him for you. I can threaten him with court action. I don't want to take him to court. A warning from you would be fine, she said. I know he'll think I'm using a sledgehammer to crack a little nut, but he won't stop when I ask him. I thought a word from you might help. I'll speak to him. Will he be in now, at Atkinsons? He'll be about the premises somewhere. I drained my coffee and stood up. I'll let you know how I get on. I'll come straight back. Before I left, I briefly admired her home. Did you move out here? No, she smiled. It's been in our family for generations. There's always been a Hardwicke here as long as anybody knows. I walked round the spacious kitchen and expressed delight at the ancient woodwork. And then I noticed the carved wooden post at the outer end of the partition. I ran my hands down it, fingering the delicate workmanship. This is nice. What's the carving? That's a witch post. Lots of houses had them installed. What's it for? I'd never come across this type of thing before. They were built into many houses in this area to protect the occupants against witches, she smiled. They date from the 17th century mostly, but I've never dated ours. Was witchcraft practised here? A good number of old women were reputed to be witches. They were supposed to make the milk go sour or cause the fruit not to ripen, stuff like that. Nuisances more than anything. There wasn't your dancing naked bits or rituals in lonely woods. They were just old ladies who terrified the superstitious locals and got blamed when things went wrong. Those posts protected the inhabitants against them. I left my motorcycle near her gate as I walked down the steep hill to Dell Farm. I knocked at the door and waited. A woman's voice shouted, "Come in! The door's open!" I entered a spacious farm kitchen with hams hanging from the ceiling and the smell of new bread heavy in the air. An old lady sat in a chair beside a roaring log fire. I think I must have aroused her from her slumbers. "And who might you be?" she demanded. "P.C. Rowan," I said, "the policeman from Aidensfield." "You're a bit off your area, aren't you?" she quizzed me. Not anymore. Now we've got motorcycles, we go further than we did on bikes. We share the area." "You'll have come for us, Reg, will you? Something to do with his guns, is it?" "Are you Mrs. Atkinson?" "I am, but Reg is my son. He's the boss here." "It's really young Ager I want to see," I explained. "Why would you want to see him, then? He's not in trouble, is he?" "No," I said, "but I hear he's making a pest of himself." "Pest? What sort of pest?" I provided brief details of his alleged misbehaviour, and she listened intently. She smiled fleetingly, and when I'd finished she said, "Lads will be lads. It'll be due to his sap rising, Mr. Rowan. I agree it's nothing serious, Mrs. Atkinson, but his behaviour is unnerving for Miss Hardwicke." "Hardwicke, did you say?" She threw the question at me with those eyes flashing brightly. "Yes, up at Oak Crag Cottage." "And she ought to know better than to bring you in, should that one," the old lady said. "Fancy bringing you all the way in for a trifling thing like that. She ought to be ashamed." "It's not nice, Mrs. Atkinson, having unknown lads making nuisances of themselves when you're a woman living alone. I don't mind coming out to help put a stop to it." "Nay, it's not that, Mr. Rowan, it's that woman, Hardwicke. It's the first time I've come across a Hardwicke woman that couldn't sort things out by herself." "Why?" I asked, intrigued. Catherine Hardwicke seemed a perfectly ordinary young woman. "They're witches," she said, with all seriousness. "All Hardwicke women are witches." I laughed. "Witches?" I said, thinking she was joking. "You'll have heard of Nan Hardwicke, haven't you? Old Nan Hardwicke, who was a witch in these hills years ago?" "No," I had to confess. After leaning forward and eyeing me carefully, she unravelled a fable of old Nan Hardwicke. She was a witch whose notoriety was widespread in the North Yorkshire moors where Mrs. Atkinson was a young girl. Everyone for miles around knew old Nan. "Is Catherine Hardwicke a descendant of old Nan?" I asked. "She is." The lady nodded her grey head seriously. "All those Hardwicke women were witches, and she's no better. Mark my words, young man." "What sort of thing does she do, then?" "Turns milk sour if she comes in the house, makes folks ill by looking at them. Little things like that, like her mother and the other women folk did. Milk would never come to butter if a Hardwicke was around." "Is that why you said she could sort out her own trouble with this mischief-maker?" I asked. "Aye," she said. "Any witch worth her salt could sort out that kind of trouble. Do you know what they did in a situation like this? When folks upset them, angered them, scandalised them?" I shook my head. "The witch took a pigeon, Mr. Rowan, a wild pigeon, a wood stodgy we used to call 'em. They made pigeon pie, but they took the heart out and stuck pins into it, into the heart, that is. They put in as many pins as they could, lots and lots, and then put the heart into a tin and cooked it. Then they put it near the door, out of reach of cats and things, out of sight. And, well, it made the mischief-maker want to apologise for what he'd done. He went to the house and made his peace. It always works, Mr. Rowan." She spoke her final words in the present tense. "And you think Catherine should do that?" I put the direct question. "Nay, lad, I didn't say that. I said she could do that because her previous womanfolk did that sort of thing. If she wants to bring you fellas in, then that's her business." She spoke those words with an air of finality. "Is Ted Ager in, Mrs. Atkinson? I ought to talk to him while I'm here." "Try those sheds at the bottom of our yard. He's down there, fettling tractor." "Thanks. And thanks for the story of old Nan." "It's true," she said as I left the warmth of the kitchen to seek Ted Ager. "I found him working on the tractor. He had the plugs out and was cleaning some parts with a wire brush." "Ted Ager?" I spoke his name as I walked in. He glanced up from his work and smiled at me. "Aye, that's me." "I'm P.C. Rowan from Aidensfield," I announced. He continued to work, acknowledging me with a curt nod of his curly black head. He was about 22 or 3, a sturdy youth in dirty overalls and heavy hobnail boots. His face was round and weathered, with a hint of mischief written into his smile. "So much up, is it?" he asked. "Have you been annoying Catherine Hardwicke?" I decided to put the matter straight to him. "Playing jokes on her, messing up her garden and so on?" "Me? No," he said without batting an eyelid and without stopping his work. "Somebody has," I said. "She's upset, and if I catch the person it'll mean court." "It's not me," he said firmly, furiously rubbing at a piece of rusty metal with a wire brush. "Then don't do it," I said, leaving him. I felt it would be a waste of time pressing him further. If Aga was the culprit, my brief visit would halt his unwelcome attentions. I walked back up to Catherine Hardwicke's house to explain my action. I went round to the back, but she was not in the garden, and I noticed the kitchen door was open. I knocked and stepped inside a couple of paces, shouting, "Miss Hardwicke, are you there?" There was no reply, so I continued to shout as I entered the kitchen. Her lunch was in the course of preparation, so she must be around. I called again, "Miss Hardwicke!" "Upstairs," she shouted. "Who is it?" "The policeman, P.C. Rowan." "Oh, I'll be down in a minute." "Sit down." I sat on a kitchen chair, holding my crash helmet in my hands, and as I waited, my eyes ranged across the half-prepared meal. A pigeon lay on the kitchen table, plucked clean except for its head. Its innards lay beside it, having been expertly gutted, and I saw the tiny heart set aside from the other giblets. There was a small tin beside the heart, and a pin cushion, thick with pins and needles. I thought of Mrs. Atkinson and her tales of old Nan. "Hello," she returned, smiling broadly. "Sorry, I was upstairs, changing out of my working clothes." "I just popped in to say I've spoken to young Aga," I announced. "He denied making mischief, but I'm convinced it was him. I warned him about the consequences of repeating any mischief at your house, so I reckon we've seen the last of him. If he does come back, or if anybody else starts those tricks, let me know." "It's most kind of you, Mr. Rowan. I really appreciate your help." After some small talk, I left her to her cooking, my brain striving to recall the details of Mrs. Atkinson's story. It was definitely a pigeon's heart on that table, and the pin cushion was so conveniently positioned next to it. 3 days later, my telephone rang. "Is that P.C. Rowan?" asked a woman's voice. "Speaking." "It's Catherine Hardwicke," the voice told me. "You called the other day about young Aga." "That's right," I recalled. "Has he been troubling you again?" "On the contrary." There was a smile in her voice. "He's been to apologise. He said he did it for a lark, but didn't realise the upset he would cause. I've accepted his apology, Mr. Rowan, so there won't be any need for further action, will there?" "No," I agreed. "No, that's all. There'll be no court action. Thanks for ringing." I replaced the phone and reckoned the previous generations of Hardwicke women would be very proud of their Catherine. Happily for the Hardwicke women and those of their ilk, the Witchcraft Act of 1735 had been repealed, albeit not until 1951. England had a long history of cruelty and antagonism towards old ladies who were regarded as witches, and before the 1735 Act, witchcraft had been a capital offence. The last judicial execution for witchcraft possibly occurred at Huntingdon in 1716, when a woman and her 9-year-old daughter were hanged. And the last recorded committal was at Leicester in 1717, when an old woman and her son were charged with casting spells, possessing familiars, and being able to change their shapes. It was not until 1951, however, that witches were safe from prosecution in England, and the statute which brought about this change was the Fraudulent Mediums Act 1951. The provision of that act which was of interest to the police was Section 1. it created the offence of acting as a spiritualistic medium or using telepathy, clairvoyance or other similar powers with intent to deceive, or, when so acting, using any fraudulent device when it is proved that the person so acted for reward. Those who reckon they can perform miracles of this kind purely for entertainment need have no worries, but those who seek to make money from their so-called powers can expect a file of their activities to be sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions. In the bucolic bliss of North Yorkshire's Rydale, I hardly expected to consider a prosecution under the Fraudulent Mediums Act of 1951. But my eyes were opened at the annual whist drive and jumble sale held in Aidensfield Village Hall. This was an early event of the year, the social occasion of the spring equinox, when everyone in the village took mountains of junk for someone else to buy, and obliged by buying mountains of someone else's junk in return. Thus the junk of the village did a tour of the households, and much money passed hands for worthy causes. Sergeant Blaketon telephoned and instructed me to perform duty outside the hall that Saturday afternoon. I had to control the crowds, prevent indiscriminate parking, and keep an eye open for pickpockets and other villains. I was not unduly busy. The only villain likely to make an appearance was Claude Jeremiah Greengrass, and I was somewhat surprised, and I dare admit disappointed, when he failed to put in his anticipated attendance. Claude Jeremiah liked jumble sales because he bought most of his clothes from such places. I liked him there because his presence gave me work. I had to keep an eye on him to stop him stealing things. With the grand opening neatly performed at 2:30 p.m. by the vicar's wife, and with my public order and parking duties enforced without incident, I entered the hall for a survey of pickpockets and ne'er-do-wells. It was then I spotted the fortune-teller. This was a new idea. As my eyes settled on the ornate tent in a corner in front of the stage, I found it most impressive. The tent had the appearance of a small Arabian structure, circular in shape, with a tall centre pole and flags flying from the top. The drapes were open down the front, and the mysterious interior was coloured deep purple. In front of the opening was a table also covered with purple, and upon the table was a crystal ball. A large notice pinned to the tent told us that this was Gypsy Rose Lee. Behind the ball sat the gypsy herself. She was a small woman with a deeply tanned face, most of which was smothered by a veil, which covered the nose and mouth. Her head was swathed in brilliant silken bands, and her voluminous sleeves billowed as she sat before the crystal ball. Her hands were heavy with jewellery, and a tiny bowl of incense burned inside the tent, sending a strong aroma about the hall. It was a most impressive display, and I watched with fascination, because every woman in the place seemed to want her fortune told. I heard the chink of silver as money changed hands, and was surprised to see the growing queue of women, all eager to have their palms read or their fortunes told for the princely sum of 5 shillings. I was kept fairly busy during the sale. Children got lost, people misplaced belongings, old ladies lost keys and purses, some teenage lads became a shade too boisterous, and an exploding fuse put all the lights out. By 5 o'clock it was all over. The cake store was deserted, and the assorted stalls of junk had little left. I chatted with Miss Jenks, the secretary and treasurer of the Village Hall Committee, and expressed my pleasure at a well-conducted event. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan. We have done well, but then we always do." "What's the profit? Do we know yet?" "Not yet, but I imagine it'll be around the £150 mark. An excellent result. It's going to the church steeple fund this year. I like the gypsy idea, a real novelty." I nodded in the direction of the heavily clad woman who was demolishing her tent and packing her fortune-telling impedimenta. "Yes, it was a good crowd-puller. She rang me rather late to be mentioned in our posters and advertisements, but word got round." "Who is she?" "Gypsy Rose Lee," smiled Miss Jenks. "The real one, the one you see in Blackpool in the summer. She rang to ask if she could hire the space from us." Hire space? Yes, she rang and asked what I'd charge to rent a corner of the room. And what did you say? I asked gently. I said we didn't hire space, but if she really wanted to come and entertain us, she could give us 10% of her takings and they'd go to the steeple fund. And she could keep the rest? Yes, the committee felt it was a nice idea. I telephoned them all when I got the request, and Gypsy Rose rang back for our decision. We all agreed, Mr. Rowan. Oh, dear. I said, I haven't broken the law, have I? No, I smiled. No, but the gypsy might have. If she's been taking money for herself by professing to tell fortunes with the intention of deceiving the public, then she might have committed a criminal offence. Oh, Mr. Rowan, it's all a bit of innocent fun. I would have agreed had it not been for my recollection of lots of cash dropping into the palm of that gypsy. If every woman had had her fortune told this afternoon, that gypsy would have reaped a fortune. I made a hasty calculation in my head and reckoned she'd collected about £70. If she gave £7 of that to charity, it left a huge profit, over £60, more than a month's wages for the average man. The tent by this time had been reduced to a pile of flimsy material which was being packed into a large suitcase. The crystal ball had gone and the other materials were in a large leather bag. The gypsy woman headed for the cloakroom, no doubt to change out of her ceremonial dress. I decided I needed to use the gents. I made for the cloakroom too. One of the cubicles was occupied, showing the engaged sign, and on the floor I found a pile of flimsy silk and chiffon. I heard a window click. I rushed and ran down the alley at the side of the village hall. I was just in time to see Claude Jeremiah Greengrass, with his face the colour of chocolate, squeezing out of the gents' toilet window. "Hello, Claude Jeremiah." I beamed. "Going far?" He said nothing. There is very little one can say when one is caught climbing out of a gent's toilet window with one's face coloured chocolate, and with ornate earrings dangling from one's aching lobes. I seized his shoulders and hauled him through, placing him squarely on the ground before me. His wizened, pinched and elfin face twitched as I said, "Pockets, open them all up, turn them out." Still, without a word, he obeyed. To give the fellow his due, when he was caught red-handed, he was most cooperative. He produced £62, 10 shillings in cash, and there was a further £5 in his wallet. "The wallet money's mine, Mr. Rowan," he said, and I believed him. The other was in a separate pocket, and I knew enough of my local villain's behaviour to realise he'd keep today's cash-taking separate from the other. Standing there in the back alley, I chanted the provision of the Fraudulent Mediums Act to him, and told him he was being reported for contravening its provisions, and then I steered him back into the room to face Miss Jenks. "Miss Jenks," I said, "this is your gypsy. Claude Jeremiah Greengrass, to be precise, and he has a donation to make to your charity. Isn't that right, Claude?" I shook his collar. "Yes, Mr. Rowan." I handed her the £62, 10 shillings. She was sufficiently fast-thinking to appreciate the situation, and I noted the quick smile as she looked at the abandoned suitcases and unpacked tent. "There was the question of rent for that space, Miss Jenks," I said. "Mr. Greengrass and I had a discussion outside, and we agreed that £5 was a reasonable sum for the afternoon. Mr. Greengrass will be happy to oblige, I'm sure." "But, Mr. Rowan, there's all that money." "Rent, Claude, or it's a file to the DPP, my lad." "Yes, Mr. Rowan." He pulled out his wallet, extracted £5 notes, and gingerly handed them to Miss Jenks. She smiled, issued a receipt, and pushed the cash into a money box. "Mr. Greengrass is most generous. I do believe this Jumble sale's profits are the best we've ever had, thanks to you. I must make a note in the minutes. Maybe you come again next year." "I'm sure he will, Miss Jenks, and on the same terms, Claude Jeremiah." And as we say in the force, He made no reply. It will be remiss of me to suggest that a rural policeman's job is all work and no play. Certainly in my time as a village constable, the position demanded a 24-hour responsibility, even though our duty sheet showed that we worked 8-hour shifts. In truth, an 8-hour day was a rarity because people called or rang with problems, and it was understood that we attended to all matters that came our way, even though we were officially off duty or on leave. Even so, we were allocated days off duty. On the duty sheets they were shown as RD, which means rest day, and they moved forward 2 at a time. Monday, Tuesday 1 week, Wednesday, Thursday the next, Friday, Saturday after that, and with Sunday, Monday to follow, ad infinitum. As this ritual progressed, it became a great achievement to secure a Saturday, Sunday weekend off duty. On this kind of rota system, Saturday, Sunday weekends came round very infrequently, and were consequently cherished as a gift from the gods. In practice, however, something always happened to cause our Saturday, Sunday weekends to be altered. Some incident would occur through which it became necessary to work on those sacred days, and this served only to galvanise us into positive action, designed to secure that cherished time off. Sergeant Blaketon was noted for his ability to find excuses to cancel our weekends off. He had a thing about policemen working when no one else was. He appeared to think it was good for us. Through working almost every Saturday, Sunday, however, the discerning constable begins to yearn for a weekend off and contemplates the best ways of getting his weekends free. One of those ways was to participate in police sport. Basing my logic on the understanding that if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, I renewed my acquaintance with the sporting section of my local constabulary. Living in Yorkshire, this meant playing cricket. I reasoned that if I wanted a Saturday off duty now and again to be with my growing family, the easiest guarantee was to join the divisional cricket team. If I did this, I would be sent to play at selected rural pitches within our division, and I could take along my wife and 4 tiny supporters. We'd all get an airing. With this devious plan at the back of my mind, I singled out the cricket captain of our division. One fine April evening I came across him in Eltering police station. I'd popped in to record someone's production of an insurance certificate and driving licence. Sergeant Alex Benwell was there, checking some court sheets. He was my passport to free weekends. "Evening, Sergeant." I removed my cap and hung it on a peg, trusting my greeting was affable and warm. "Now, lad," he grunted, while fingering down a long list of defendants due to appear at Eltering Magistrates' Court. "Put the kettle on, will you?" "Yes, Sergeant." In no time the leaky station kettle was singing, and I'd found some stained mugs and a tin containing tea leaves. I produced a useful brew in an earthenware teapot with a cracked spout, and waited for him to leave his court sheets. Soon he came into the tiny rest room, smiled, and sat on a rickety chair. "Now, lad," he said for the second time. "Good brew, is it?" "Like my mother makes," I said. I poured a generous mugful, which he inspected carefully before sipping noisily. "Not bad," he said. "Aye, not bad at all. Your mother sounds as though she knows somewhat about making tea." "She likes a strong pot," I agreed. "The sort that a spoon can stand up in." He laughed loudly. "Aye, we used to call it tonsil varnish when I was in the army. It was powerful stuff." He sipped again, and then eyed me carefully. "Rowan, is it?" "Yes, Sergeant. I'm at Aidensfield, the new man there." "You'll play cricket," he said by way of a statement rather than a question. He'd introduced the subject, him, not me. I recognised my golden opportunity to get into the team. "Yes," I said confidently. "I was captain of our lads' team and used to play in the second team as an adult." I daren't admit I'd never scored more than 15 and wasn't a very good fielder or bowler. "You'll do for us," he said. "What are you doing next Saturday?" "Has the season started?" I asked. "Week after." He slurped his tea and smacked his lips. "Why, you make a sound brew, young man. Next week we're practising, down at Elthering Nets here on the town playing field, Saturday afternoon." "I'm on late turn," I told him. "That rules me out." "Who allocated that shift to a cricketer?" he bellowed. "No cricketer gets a late turn on a Saturday. I'll have words with old Blaketon. From now on, you don't work late on Saturdays, so be at the nets at 2 o'clock. "Yes, Sergeant. But suppose Sergeant Blaketon won't change my duties?" "He will," was all he said, draining the dregs with his customary noise. "Thanks for the tea, lad. What's your first name?" "Nick," I said. "Nick," he repeated, getting up from his chair. He was a massive man, with a huge girth and legs like tree trunks. I found myself wondering how he could run and field. He seemed to move with ponderous lethargy, but he was a contact worth cultivating, and I chatted away to him, discussing the job and his views on how rural bobbies should operate. He talked a lot of sense, and I liked him from the start. Later that evening, I met Sergeant Blaketon and broached the subject of cricket. "Oh, Sergeant, I met Sergeant Benwell at Elthering earlier this evening." He eyed me with considerable suspicion. "And?" He gazed at me through those dark eyes and fierce eyebrows. "He wants me to play cricket for the divisional team," I rushed out the words, "and says he wants me to attend practice at Elthering Nets next Saturday afternoon." Did he now? He lapsed into an unhealthy silence. "He asked if you would change my duties," I said weakly. "Rowan, you ought to know better than listen to Alex Benwell. You know what he's like." "Like?" I said innocently. "Yes, like. You've seen him, the size of him." I nodded. "Beer. That's the result of years of drinking gallons of beer, and all at cricket matches. Cricket's not a sport for him, Rowan. It's an excuse to go boozing on a Saturday night. That's how he gets out of Saturday night duties, Rowan. Puts it all down to sport." "You didn't approach him, then? You didn't seek him out to fix this for you?" "No, Sergeant. Not like some I know," he said. "Some less honourable members of this section always wheedle their way into the cricket team to avoid Saturday duties, Rowan." "He asked if I could attend the nets, Sarge. I suppose he wants to see me play." "All right, if that's all. Nets it is. Next Saturday." "You don't play football, do you?" "Not really, Sergeant," I had to admit. "Now, that's my game, Rowan. Pure English football. I play football in the winter, you know, to keep fit. That's a real game. Don't make this a habit, Rowan." I enjoyed my session at the nets. There'd be some 15 off-duty policemen there, all testing their new boots, their freshly laundered whites and their muscles. I had a go at bowling and found my old skills returning, although my efforts with a bat weren't particularly promising. I fielded 1 or 2 nice balls and spent a very enjoyable 3 hours. The outcome of my first practice was that I was selected for the divisional police team to play in the Rydale League. Our opponents would be teams from the villages of the district. Because the police had no home ground, we begged and borrowed fields from other clubs. And because Elthering was the most central, we were allowed to use it whenever Elthering had an away game. That became our home ground, the away grounds being remote villages and hamlets in the moors and dales. It would be impossible to describe the sheer enjoyment we experienced at those villages. But our match against Brandtgate First 11 one Saturday in June typifies our experiences. It was an away match for us, which meant we had to tolerate Brandtgate's unique pitch. I had never played there, but my colleagues assured me a treat was in store. Sergeant Benwell collected several of us at Elthering Police Station. and I was surprised to find myself being transported in a battered old ambulance. This was his cricket coach, the vehicle he used to ferry himself and his pals to distant matches. The retired ambulance trundled and rolled across the countryside, and we climbed steeply into the depths of the moors. Half an hour later we were trundling merrily across the heights with staggering views spread below our lofty route. "Down here," announced Alex Benwell as he turned into a narrow lane. His route dropped sharply from elevated moorland road, turned left down the sheer side of a valley, then twisted and wove between high, dry stone walls. We drove slowly down the 1-in-3 gradient, the old truck groaning in low gear towards the bottom. Down there nestled the hamlet of Brandtgate, a sleepy moorland collection of farms and cottages. Suddenly, we rounded a blind corner, and there, right across the road, was a 5-bar gate. Its purpose was to prevent the free-ranging moorland sheep from invading the village gardens, and as we approached it, Sergeant Benwell pressed his foot on the brake. Nothing happened. "Brakes have gone," he shouted as we began to gather speed. The monster gate loomed closer, and I saw him grip the steering wheel firmly between both hands. Then I felt the ancient vehicle rapidly accelerate. He'd put his foot on the accelerator, and we roared towards the stout gate. The nose of the heavy vehicle rammed it amidships, and the gate flew open with a crash. We hurtled through, and were now careering headlong down the continuing gradient. Benwell knew the road, and he was a first-class driver, he had to be, to guide the brakeless old truck down this steep, winding lane. By the grace of God, nothing was coming up the hill. There was no room to pass even a bike. By knowing his vehicle so well and being such a fine steersman, he suddenly turned the wheel and we roared off the road into a long field. He allowed the low gears to control the forward rush, and after about 100 yards, the ambulance eased to a smooth halt. 7 cricketers emerged, some feeling sick, and others marvelling at his motoring skills. But Benwell was unruffled. He kicked the front wheels and said calmly, "It's never done that before," and then walked off to the pavilion. The pavilion was little more than a decorated hen-house, but we managed to change into our whites, and as we busied ourselves for a practice session, the Brandtgate captain came in. "Now then," he said gruffly, "most of you fellas are newcomers, aren't you?" 8 or 9 of them, confirmed Alex Benwell, tying his laces. "Then you better come with me," said the captain, "and I'll explain the rules." "Rules?" I queried. "Local rules," said Alex Benwell. "Go out and listen to him." We obeyed, and the dour Yorkshireman led us away. We followed through long grass for a considerable distance, and he halted on a neatly shorn piece of land. It was 22 yards long by about 10 feet wide. All around was long grass, knee-high in places, and I noted the outfield was surrounded by an electric fence. Furthermore, it was impossible to see one of the boundaries because the pitch had been hewn out of a steep sloping hillside. The pitch was the only flat part of the field. Above it, the outfield rose steeply towards a wooden fence several yards distant, and the electric fence was midway up that slope.